the K-shaped recovery. At a time when inequality was already at historically high levels, the pandemic has pushed us much further apart. Tonight, we focus on individuals and groups that have lost ground this past year, the lower leg of that K. How has the pandemic economy impacted low-income individuals, women, and families in particular? What policies can help drive a more equitable recovery, and at what cost? Joining us are 3 UW faculty members, all affiliates of the Institute for Research on Poverty, who study public policy and how it impacts society and the economy. J. Michael Collins is the Fetzer Family Chair in Consumer and Personal Finance in the School of Human Ecology and the Faculty Director of the Center for Financial Security. Laura Dresser is a Clinical Assistant Professor in the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work and the Associate Director of COWS. Tim Smeeding is the Lee Rainwater Distinguished Professor of Public Affairs and Economics in the Robert M. La Follette School of Public Affairs. Thank you all for joining me tonight. It's great to have faculty on who have worked together as much as the 3 of you, and I hope that we can have a very conversational Q&A after you each give your opening remarks. Should be a very interesting program. So leading us off tonight is Laura Dresser, Clinical Assistant Professor in the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work. She's also the Associate Director of COWS, a UW-Madison Think and Do tank, where she's worked for more than 2 decades. Her research and practice focuses on low-wage work and workforce development systems. She's co-editor of the Gloves Off Economy, Workplace Standards at the Bottom of America's Labor Market. And she's working on issues surrounding care work and the connection between quality care, quality jobs, and minimum wages. Professor Dresser received her Master's of Social Work and PhD in both social work and economics from the University of Michigan. And it is not often we invite a Michigan person onto our show, but Professor Dresser has spent more time in Wisconsin than Michigan. So we've made an exemption yet again. So Laura, thanks for joining us tonight, and we look forward to your remarks about the labor market.
Thanks a lot for having me. And it's true, I feel much more Badger than Blue, so probably that keeps me safe in this crowd. I want to start by talking about what's happened to working people in this economic crisis. And I think that there's a couple of ways that if you look at this economy, you just think everything has changed. The COVID pandemic has changed everything about work. And this is true. And I'm going to talk through a lot of the fundamental changes in the way people are working that have happened as a result of the pandemic. At the same time, the underlying problems of inequality, especially the deep racial inequality in this nation, and the very bad problems of the structure of low-wage jobs and the lack of ability to afford living in them, those problems have been exposed and exacerbated by this crisis. And so it is new, but in ways that are predictable and long-standing and old. Let me talk about first how it's new. There's 3 groups of workers to see in this economy. The first group, and the most obvious probably, is the unemployed. The pandemic collapse in the month of March was dramatic and historic, a loss of jobs the like in a month that the like of which we'd never seen. Even today, we have more than 7% fewer jobs than we did in February. That is a deeper hole even today than we ever hit in the Great Recession. So job loss is intense, and the unemployment faced by workers is at crisis levels. That unemployment is concentrated specifically on workers who are from the spaces where we congregated, because we're not congregating anymore. Restaurants, bars, hotels, hospitality industry, travel industry, the things we have contracted on what we're doing, those are the workers that are out of work. The second set of workers to see in this economy for whom work is fundamentally changed are those who are essential in some way, right, but exposed in their work so that their work continues, but with extra pressure and danger of exposure to the virus, either through coworkers or consumer contact. Those workers are facing the fear of the virus, the fear of taking the virus home to someone they love, the stress of the jobs. And I think especially important to see in that category are nursing home workers. I know we often think of healthcare workers, and those have faced the, the intensity of the work in the hospitals, et cetera. But nursing homes is where the deaths have been concentrated, and the really intense emotional labor of working with people who are sick or trying to stay well and can't have any contact with their families, especially as they die. You think about the intensity of what's happened in nursing homes to the workers in them. So that's a second group of workers. A third group of workers looks a lot like me, right? I have all my income. I work from my house. I teach my classes from my house. I have the safety and the security of a paycheck and no exposure through my work. But that experience is relatively narrow and relatively elite. So I want you to notice that the workers who have lost work are the restaurant workers, the bar workers, the hotel housekeepers, the nursing home workers, the childcare workers, the poultry and meat processing workers. These are the exposed workers, right? All of those are low-wage jobs structured with uneven hours, weak benefit packages, and really difficult conditions to make ends meet, even outside the context of a COVID pandemic. And so what you see then is that those three ways that work has changed has fed and exposed and exacerbated the very inequalities that were part of this economy, part of the labor market, and really increases the crisis for the lowest wage workers. So the unemployed are the very workers who had the least resources going into this. The exposed essential workers are facing these crises of health without sufficient income to help them with the extra costs of exposure. Many of them without health insurance, or health insurance only through public sources, not through their employment. And so for me, I think then you need to focus on, as policy options, what we need to take on is that brutal inequality in the US labor market that we have tolerated for too long, that COVID has again exposed and exacerbated. And that means raising minimum wages. I think you see that in the Biden, his campaign, and in his proposals for the recovery. Keeping paid sick leave reality for workers is absolutely essential coming out of this crisis. Thinking about how to make sure that healthcare is always available to workers and not hinging on their jobs, so that at the very moment they lose their jobs, they lose their health insurance. A system that delivers health insurance to everyone despite employment would really make a big difference when you have a contraction of employment. And paid medical leave so that people can take care of people. And I think, I probably nattered on a little long, so I'll just stop there. But that's sort of the kind of package that takes on those underlying inequalities and begins to try and pull us back together, instead of letting this health crisis rip us further apart.
Well, thank you, Laura, for those comments. And indeed, I think few people realize just how far off we are from peak employment. The unemployment rate today looks deceptively sanguine, below 7%, but that's not really telling the full story. I look forward to following up with some questions and talking more about minimum wage plans, et cetera. Next up, we have Tim Smeeding, the Lee Rainwater Distinguished Professor of Public Affairs and Economics in the La Follette School for Public Affairs. He is a nationally renowned expert on anti-poverty policy. His recent work has focused on social and economic mobility across generations, the inequality of income, consumption, and wealth, and poverty in national and cross-national contexts. He was the founding director of the Luxembourg Income Study from 1983 to 2006 and served as the director of the Institute for Research on Poverty here at UW-Madison from 2008 to 2014. He's the author of 7 books, including From Parents to Children, The Intergenerational Transmission of Advantage, and The Handbook of Economic Inequality, among others. Professor Smeeding received an MA in economics from the University of Connecticut before coming to UW-Madison, where he earned his MS and PhD in economics. Tim, it is great to have you back at UW-Madison. I know you've been back for a long time now, but I think we ran into each other when we were at different institutions, and fancy meeting you here. Tell us what's going on with low-income families and what we can do about it.
Thanks, Mike. It's nice to be here. I'm going to pick up right where Laura left off. Those essential workers who are stressed out by the pandemic and those whose jobs are gone have children. They come from families, okay? Classrooms are closed. Parental stress is surging. We have a threat to low-income children of unbelievable proportions right now. Those who are laid off and jobless are worried about food, worried about home life, worried about paying their rent. And this causes stress. And stress has been shown to harm infants still in the womb, and especially in early life. Our own researchers, Bobby Wolf and Seth Pollack, have shown this time and again the brains of low-income kids who are growing up in bad conditions or worse. Okay. Then what school closures do is they confine rich and poor kids to homes even more unequal than their classrooms, at the risk of widening the achievement gap. Low-income kids aren't as well connected, don't have as much tutoring, don't go to schools, may not have the great internet connections, and they're not learning a lot. Even more important, what we saw early on is kids get hungry. Now, it's hard to measure child hunger all the time in a pandemic, but 4 different surveys have shown sharp increases in food insecurity, and everyone's seen the lines at the food banks in many cities around the country. So this all creates serious issues, okay? We also know that even brief stays in poverty can cause children harm, especially when they're young. Being exposed to excessive stress can permanently change brain structure and function, and leads to problems from learning disabilities to heart disease and diabetes. It sticks with you. And if we think poverty was bad before the pandemic, imagine what it's doing to children now, given all the things that Laura told you about and all the things that you see out there every day. So the bottom line is poverty is bad for kids, okay? So what can policy do to help kids and help families with kids? Well, as you probably know, pandemic economic support has been up and down and is now about ready to run out again. We have a new president now. Already, Biden has expanded the SNAP, or food share we call it, benefits by 15% via executive order. Food share is up 21% in Wisconsin. There's over 700,000 people receiving food aid every month, and that's since last March. And now we're also compensating for school meals that are missed and complementing food bank efforts. So that's good. He's proposed some EIPs, emergency income payments, one-time help. The targets aren't set. The distribution channels are fuzzy, unfortunately. Middle-class working people who go on unemployment or who haven't moved since they paid taxes last time, they're fairly easy to find and they get help. But low-income people who moved and where the post office has been trying to forward them notice that they're eligible for benefits and so forth are having a much harder time. We have about 6 million families in this country who never collected their original March 20 to May 2020 EIP benefits. But the key, that what's been proposed and the key thing right now is a better and more lasting policy. A refundable child tax credit paid monthly to all families with children under age 18 for the poorest up through middle income levels. And we're going to call that by its generic name, a child allowance. Now, I've spent 2 years on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on how to have child poverty, and we came out suggesting that the easiest and cleanest, least burdensome way to support families with children in uncertain times is to make the child credit refundable and pay it out monthly as a child allowance. So there's growing scholarly consensus we need to do something, okay? There's strong evidence that lack of income hurts poor kids. And so this is what we want to do. So what should we do? How can we get there? Let me just briefly explain what's going on here. The child allowance, or a monthly refundable child tax credit that our National Academy of Sciences group proposed, will go to all children under 18 who have Social Security numbers. That is, all children who are born in the United States or who are naturalized citizens, except for children in very high income families. The benefit's neither taxable for income purposes or countable against means-tested benefits. Now, to complement that, Biden would retain the earned income tax credit, which helps people who work and have larger families who they can't support with that work. And he's proposed additional child care support that would combine consistent monthly child allowance, something every month, even when work fails, with the strong incentives for added market work as we emerge from the COVID recession is what we'll call it, okay? Now, how do we get here? I mean, child poverty wasn't a big topic in the presidential elections. Children don't lobby. They don't vote. But what's happened is traditionalists and conservatives like the idea that child allowance benefits non-working mothers, unlike subsidies for child care alone. So 16 conservative intellectuals, J.D. Vance, UW Lebanon, they called for child allowance. And the idea rapidly gained ground among the crisis that deepened needs and expanded the country's notions of what the government can spend and what can do for kids. So how would it work? Many of you may not know this, but we already have a $2,000 per kid, $170 per month child tax credit, but it's not fully refundable. It helps 65% of families with kids, those with incomes between about $40,000 and $400,000, okay? But about half of all poor kids are in families with incomes below that, and they're not getting it. And this benefit is currently delivered once a year, invisibly, as part of a tax refund. Oh, I got a little bit bigger tax refund. Well, Biden and Romney decided that that's not enough. They both want to raise that amount and pay it monthly to stabilize incomes so that there's less stress in the family and there's something coming in regularly every month. Both proposed $3,000 a year per child, $250 a month for kids 6 to 17. Biden wants an extra $50 a month for kids under 6. Romney wants $100 more for kids under 6. So that would be $350 a month for kids under 6 from a Republican. Now, Romney proposes to pay for it by cutting other programs like the EITC. Biden plans to set it up first and then pay for it in a tax bill later this year or early next. So then you ask, okay, how are we going to do this? Who's going to pay out these checks? There's two alternatives. Biden and the Democrats like the IRS. The IRS has never done this before. Then Romney, the National Academy of Sciences Committee, and me like the Social Security Administration. They know how to deliver a check every month, okay? So it's attractive to both sides because it reduces poverty by 40 or 50% more for Black kids. It provides relief for parents struggling with increasing costs of raising children. It stabilizes and reliably supplements income every month, something low-income families relish. Those who lost jobs, those who can only find part-time work, who can't make ends meet with the work they've got, you've got this coming in every month. It might also have a positive effect on fertility. In other words, having children, which is something we need because we're not having nearly enough children in our country right now. It also produces long-term positive effects on poor kids from education gains, avoiding crime, graduating, earning more money as adults. The benefit to cost ratio is about 8-to-1. Okay? It is also highly visible evidence that government can indeed do something positive for poor families and kids month after month. This would be, oh my gosh, every month, here it is, deposited in my account. Most importantly, and I'm almost done here, is that a monthly child allowance treats children as public goods, not just as private responsibility for parents alone. It makes all kids deserving of unqualified public income support, regardless of work status or family income. So it's like basic K-12 education, everyone gets it. It's like healthcare in other countries that everyone gets it. But here, everyone is covered by the public sector without regard to their race, gender, neighborhood, or ethnicity. The bottom line is you can do better. 17 other countries are doing it. Canada increased its maximum payment to $400 a month about 3 years ago and cut their child poverty by 40%. So I think this is the most important piece of social policy legislation in the last 40 years, to be quite honest. And I'm going to stop here and give Mike Collins a chance to tell us what we do, and I look forward to your questions.
Tim, thank you, and thanks for your work on that important legislation. It's a great policy recommendation. We look forward to talking more about it and some of its consequences. Next up, as Tim alluded, J. Michael Collins is the Fetzer Family Chair in Consumer and Personal Finance in the School of Human Ecology. He's also the faculty director of the Center for Financial Security, a professor at the Follett School of Public Affairs, a family economics specialist for the Division of Extension, and an affiliate of the Center for Demography and Ecology. Collins studies consumer decision-making in the financial marketplace, including the role of public policy in influencing credit, savings, and investment choices. He founded the Policy Lab Consulting Group, a research consulting firm working with national foundations and government agencies, and co-founded Spring 4, an online database for mortgage servicers and counselors. Professor Collins received his Master's of Public Policy from Harvard and his PhD in Policy Analysis and Management from Cornell. And I guess he is the embodiment of Dean Shim's claim that her faculty are more involved with different centers and institutes around the campus than any other school or college. Michael, thank you for all you do for the university and our students. Look forward to hearing your thoughts about the financial marketplace in the K-shaped recovery.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for getting through that long bio. Sorry about that. I appreciate it. I think the K-shaped recovery, and you've heard this echoed in the last two remarks, is it just shows how different sets of families are experiencing the lockdown, the COVID pandemic in very different ways, depending upon where they work and what their opportunities are. It's affecting them in dramatically different ways. Some seem to be fine and others seem to be really struggling. And so my takeaway from what we're seeing in terms of family finances and household finance from the COVID crisis is very similar to that. We had a shock. Everybody had a shock. And some people were able to weather that shock better than others. This isn't new. The issues that have been raised during the last year have always been there. They've always been happening. They just haven't been as visible. They've been little shocks, episodic shocks that people have faced. Now everyone faces it at the same time. And so it's really just magnified some of those old problems. The census has been doing their household pulse survey for close to a year now. It's great data. It comes out every 2 weeks, including at the state level. So it gives us a lot of information about what's going on with people's finances. And 1 in 3 people in Wisconsin, I think it's about 28% actually, say that they're having trouble keeping up with their bills. This was 2 weeks ago. So this is still people are struggling, and it's about half of Black households. So again, that K-shape is the weight of the K is heavier depending on what color your skin is. About 15% of renters are behind on their rent. And so, this shock really has affected different groups in different ways. When I talk to students and foundations and others about strategies for dealing with shocks like this, financial shocks. I oftentimes revert to the 4Bs, which may be cute, but I think it helps think about what our strategies are. So the 4Bs, the first is buffer. A buffer is having some emergency savings, having a little bit of cash to smooth over that shock when it happens. The second B is borrow. I can borrow, I can take out a loan, I can borrow from friends and family, I can try to make ends meet. The third B is benefits. I can look for cash assistance. Maybe that's from informal or formal ways or even charity, but I can try to find benefits to try to get over my shock. And the last is backstops. These are things like insurance, social insurance, other kinds of backstops that I can have to try to get through this. And so these 4Bs really are what people have to get through. And I think we've seen an increasing interest in the last year in people recognizing like, geez, I should have had these Bs in place. I should have had some emergency savings. I should have had access to some credit. I should know how to navigate the benefit system. I think emergency savings, especially we see in surveys where consumers say they're more and more interested in having emergency savings. It turns out having emergency savings isn't easy. It's actually, especially if you're talking about low balance accounts, having a place to save that's safe and that you can access isn't necessarily easy for everyone. Often the way that people find money in emergency is they tap their 401k, they use their retirement savings. So, we have people who are getting by, but they're getting by eating the seed corn, so to speak. They're taking that long run savings and turning it into emergency savings. I think we've seen a key role of social insurance. And by social insurance, I mean things like disability insurance, old age insurance, Social Security, and unemployment insurance. We've also seen how rickety in some ways those systems are. What happens when the Social Security offices are open? What happens when our state's UI system is using a database was written in a language, a computer language that was, before many of us were born? So I think those social insurance platforms really matter, but we have to keep them maintained. And then I think the big issue that I've been thinking a lot about is how much most people rely on their employer for their benefits. And Laura alluded to this too, with health benefits, but the same is true for retirement benefits, savings benefits, even access to credit or basic transaction accounts. I think a lot of employers have come out of this COVID experience saying they really care about their employees' financial health and they're trying to do their best to give the best possible benefits to their employees. But there's also a lot of employers that can't compete. They're too small. They don't have the scale. They only have 10, 15, maybe 50 employees, but they can't get good pricing on benefits. They can't get good 401k plans. They just end up being at a disadvantage. And so I do want to give a bit of a shout out to the governor's task force on retirement that I served on with the state treasurer last week. Came out with a report suggesting that Wisconsin needs to create some retirement options, some savings options, including emergency savings options that aren't tied to employers, that are in partnership with the private sector, but provide some ways for those small businesses to provide better support to their employees. So I do think we're going to need to see more of those kinds of solutions coming out of this pandemic. And I think the governor's task force is a good example of one of those activities. Looking ahead to, another thing I'm watching carefully over the next 6 months or so is that last fall, I think our data was showing about 25% of people in the US had taken advantage of some kind of loan deferment or holiday, meaning their mortgage, their credit card, or their student loan, they were able to defer payments during the COVID crisis. That time is running out. Many mortgages now are closing the windows on those payment holidays. It still exists on federal student loans, but other loans are starting to require payments. And so, this isn't over yet. People have bridged this moment in time, this shock, with lots of different resources, including not being responsible for paying other bills. Now they're going to have to catch up. And that could be another shock that could, create another shock wave through what families are facing with. I want to point out the stimulus checks that most recently came out. The census data tells us that about 50 to, in some groups in Wisconsin, 70% of people use those stimulus checks to pay off debt. They're not saving it. They're not consuming it. They're paying off debt. So, managing debt continues to be a big issue. Last thing I'll quickly touch on is I think we've learned a lot about financial inclusion in this pandemic. By financial inclusion, I mean everything from greater access to electronic banking. Like I've done almost all my banking the last year on my phone, and more people are doing that at all income levels. We've really seen the cost of a lot of financial services get driven down. And frankly, the headlines in the last couple of weeks about people using their phones to be day traders of popular stocks, I think, are another example of that. But those inequities that we see in access to benefits and services, those exist as well. So, we don't see the same rate of women, for example, being active in equity markets. We don't see people of color being active at the same level. So just driving down the price and making things more accessible doesn't mean that we've made things more equitable. So that's going to be something else for us to pay a lot of attention to, and really think about some mindful ways to help include more and more people in the economy as we go forward. So I'll stop there. There's a lot there we can talk about in the Q&A too.
There sure is a lot we can talk about. You touched on some of it just now, Michael, but I'll wait to get into discussions of the democratization of finance and whether that's really helping people. If Laura would indulge me a minute, talk a little bit about the $15 an hour minimum wage proposal. It's getting a lot of attention right now, somewhat controversial. Obviously, New York, San Francisco, Seattle have all decided that was the right minimum wage for their labor markets, but why would that be the right wage for Wisconsin? And do you worry at all about, people in the northern part of the state own a resort, they employ a lot of kids in the summer, and, this could really add up pretty fast and make some of those businesses maybe challenged. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in the first time 15 was mentioned was 2012, when fast food workers in New York City went on strike to start that was the beginning of the fight for 15. And I think at that point that number was breathtaking. And it really laid out a marker saying we tolerate too much inequality in this economy, and workers cannot live at the bottom of the labor market. You cannot make ends meet at $15 an hour. I'm sorry, at $7.25 or, and I think since 2012, we've seen that discussion spread and evolve and really fill out. So it is true. It began, SeaTac Airport was the first, the first town that went to 15, but then big cities, big expensive places, then all of California, all of Massachusetts, all of New York, those states, it's not just the cities in those states, it's the whole state that's moving to $15 an hour on a much more aggressive timeline than the one laid out in the federal bill, which is 15 in 2025. And I think that I've just read this week some very interesting evidence from Fresno, right? So Fresno is the city where we locate our fears about the fight for 15 in that kind of, I think at the time they were moving to 15 and they're at 14 now. They're not quite to the top yet. Fresno had half of its workforce earning less than $15 an hour. It is California's low wage city. And a New York Times reporter kind of covered what's gone on in Fresno in the last 4 years as they've moved to 14. And I think through the eyes of workers who get that raise, there's just an absolute change in what they can afford to do. Can they get to the end of the month? How much are they relying on food banks and friends, and having to, kind of hold off, like what Michael is pointing out, the way that you're fighting back different debts and managing them to keep in your house, to keep your kid fed. And so, a lot of from the worker side, a really enormous difference. From employers, of course, a range of comments, but the restaurant industry over 2014 to 2019 grew as fast in Fresno, or actually a little faster than in the rest of the state. So I think also, we often have predictions of disaster or impossibility. And I think as things move, and one, I think, microbrew said, like brew owner just said, I am messing things around, but it's gradual and I can deal with it. So I just think that the reality is complex, but the possibility is so much more in reach than we ever imagine. So that's my.
Great. Thank you. Great answer. Tim, let me ask you, when you were thinking about the refundable child tax credit, was there a close second alternative? This seems like a really efficient way to get money to families. What was the next best thing you thought about if it wasn't the refundable child tax credit, or was there not a second best?
I really don't think there was a second best. There is one. The trouble is, if you expanded food stamps or your SNAP, or you expanded public housing, that would help. But that has a big problem. The more you earn, the more you have to pay for those. You lose SNAP benefits, you pay more for rent. So it's clawed back. That creates big work disincentives. Okay, this is relatively small, $3,000 a year for a family of two. That's like 15% or 20% of their poverty line. I mean, it's small, but it's efficient, and it just keeps going. The Social Security Administration pays it to the parent every month, just like I get my Social Security now at age 72, and it continues until the kid gets to be 17, or until the parenthood rights change, let's say by divorce or something, and then you do it. So there really isn't a close second.
It is efficient. It is really an efficient policy, and it'd be the best way to deliver that. And a lot of the income supports that we enacted in this pandemic recession had that same flavor, and I like that there's no disincentive. Yeah, maybe some people are getting it who maybe didn't really need it, but hey, that's better than the alternative. We have a question coming in from Sally Gans about the gender gap, which I guess I'll start with Laura on this one. The number of women who've lost jobs is really alarming, and they're in many of the jobs that are low paying and have weak benefits to begin with. Can you talk a little bit about the current status of women in the workforce and how that might change in the future, and what could be done to make further progress there?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple things to notice about this, right? The general structure of a recession, if you think of recessions as these sort of demand fluctuations, right? They're led by construction collapse, durable good collapse, right? So the 2007 recession, the way we think about recessions is all kind of man-session, if you'll forgive me. That men are in the sectors that contract the most right away. This is the reverse of that. This is, forgive me, a she session, and it's the contraction and the job loss has really fallen on women's heads. But another thing to notice, and closely related to things that Tim's talking about, the care gap that exists in our private lives has also slammed directly down onto women's heads. So women generally carry this burden with their kids about education, especially for parents who are dealing with education in the home. Moms are dealing with being essentially an educated, educational assistant during school time, and so, one of the reasons that I think we see this dramatic loss of jobs, but the unemployment rate isn't quite as high, is because a lot of women are really grappling with the brutality of managing care and work and demands of in-home schooling. So that's my kind of, I think that's an answer.
Yes. Well,
can I just build on that too? I think, we oftentimes think about this as episodic, right? So women right now aren't earning as much. They're taking on greater care roles. But that's continuous. And so think about how that's going to play out over the next 20 years for their savings, for their retirement security, the fact that they're probably going to outlive their partner, and they're going to continue to be in this caregiving role with less and less resources. And then now they just taken a couple year gap from their ability to accumulate the resources they need later. So these will be impacts that we will feel for a very long time.
So we have a question that's come in from Charles Weiss, and I'm sensitive to this, and of course lately it doesn't seem like we care too much about how we pay for any sorts of benefits and allowances that we've been extending to any number of people, individuals, households, firms, you name it. There's been a lot of debt piled up by the federal government in the United States and elsewhere. I think they put the debt clock up in New York on the way to LaGuardia Airport in the 1970s. I guess it really hasn't had its intended effect of scaring us yet. How do we pay for all this? And, how much of an allowance becomes too much? Tim, maybe you can start out on that. And then Michael, if you want to chime in on the finances.
Both the Biden and the Romney proposals would cost about $110 billion a year. Okay. That's big money in terms of talking about, transfer programs. That's peanuts in tax bills. Tax bills are worth trillions. But Biden is going to have a tax bill to pay for it, and there will be one. And he's counting on getting rid of things like special exemptions for capital income. He's talking about getting rid of oil and gas subsidies and things like that. Romney wants to pay for it all right away. And some of his ideas aren't bad. One is to phase out what we call W-2. If this system is working and every kid is getting this benefit, and women in their last trimester are under the Romney plan are starting to get the benefit even before the baby's born, we don't need W-2. We can get rid of that. But he's also talking about cutting 2/3 of the earned income tax credit, which is hard because that gives you a big incentive to go to work and continue to work. And so his program has more work disincentives than Biden's does. And he would also cut childcare and a few other things. So it's $110 billion. We went to the 2001, that cost about $45 billion in 2017, and no one batted an eyelash. That happened because we had $1 trillion tax cut for people at the top of the distribution. So someone's going to have to pay for it, but it's a sound investment that's paying 8 for 1 back. It doesn't have big work disincentives. And many, many, many people on both sides of the aisle now think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think we should all be worried about what's happening demographically and how much we're going to rely on this young generation of kids to be contributing to the labor force and delivering the goods and services we need. Because our savings that we've set aside for retirement, Michael, might not go too far if we don't have a high productivity workforce. True?
True. We do have, in terms of our borrowing right now, interest rates are at record lows. And so, if there was an emergency to borrow for, this is the best opportunity to borrow that we have. Long run, though, you're right. This is going to be hard to sustain. And we're going to have to figure out a way to make ends meet. And, the danger is that we can actually get into, drive inflation. We could get into a position where our taxes become unbearably high. So I do think this is a policy issue that policymakers need to pay attention to. Unfortunately, we oftentimes get more heat than light on these topics. And I don't know how we rationally sit down, policymakers, to talk about these issues, but it's going to be something that particularly the next generation is going to have to see happen.
Well, Tim, I just want to say, even though I worry about debt and deficits, I like your policy, and I think it's better than a lot of things we do already. And so even if we didn't want to raise taxes, there's plenty of things we could stop doing. And I would say this is worth doing instead. But
Knetter for Senate.
Oh, well, I got 1 vote. That may not be enough. Question from Anthony Cooper. would something like the Works Process Administration or Community Conservation Corps be a solution to preserve and develop job skills in people and address unmet community needs at the same time? So should we wade back into something like that? That's a bigger issue, I guess. Laura, do you want to wade into that? Or
well, I can wait a little though. Tim's got something too. I do feel like Biden has a kind of environmentally focused proposal around the greening the economy, and I think the challenge of climate change really requires public investment, and that will create some jobs. And this is a place to really, as Michael says, no better time to borrow. And climate change is going to cost a lot of money, and we have to get a lot of infrastructure in place. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And that's I don't know if that's ending up in this plan or in the infrastructure plan, but there could be a lot of, I think there could be a lot of potential with that.
Yep. There's a big infrastructure plan coming, and it's going to be targeted at places where people are going to need work. The good Senator Manchin from West Virginia understands that the handwriting for the coal industry, the handwriting's on the wall. Jobs are going to go. Wind and solar are cheaper now, and they're cleaner. They're going to need to do something there. They're going to need some sort of job development. People in Louisiana and in the oil belt in Oklahoma are going to need help. And those are places where Biden is ready to go in with infrastructure plans. Even look at, for instance, broadband. I have students working on a project right now. The governor wants to spend a whole bunch on it. We have about 500,000 households in our state that aren't very well connected to anything. So the kids aren't learning, people can't work, you can't deliver telemedicine, and there's huge needs. And so let's link everybody up by broadband so they can do more remote work, and let's train them. I totally agree with Tim that we need to train them for jobs that are available. What so-called sectoral training has worked pretty well in the Fox Valley and the manufacturing industry, because the employers are saying, we need workers. We need people to do X or people to do Y, and let's not mess around. Let's just train them how to do this particular job, run these machines, work with this robotics, and we'll give them a good job. And that's did really well in 18, 19, and early 20 in Wisconsin, and I hope that can come back.
Great. A related question from Tim Howland was really about perhaps these hospitality workers who are so impacted by the pandemic economy. Is there something we need to do particularly with them to maybe give them a different set of skills if the recovery is going to be really long and slow in those sectors? And might this be that, or are there other options for them that you would recommend?
From my perspective, I think, we've all had an evolving understanding of how much was going to change as a result of this pandemic, right? So back when delusionally in March, I was like, oh, well, in a few weeks, we're going to get rid of this virus and then we'll be back to normal, right? And I think these long-term changes are really hard to predict about what is fundamentally changed, about the way we eat, the way we get together, the way we travel, conferences. It's hard to know if conferences are coming back. So I think there's some very real questions about what comes back. And I think, but I expect also there will be jobs. The money will run in other directions if we're not going to restaurants. And I think, this sectoral training partnerships and other strategies to connect employer demand to worker needs is one way, but then also these enormous public investments we need in everything from broadband to childcare to a cleaner and more resilient future for our infrastructure systems, like the challenge of a frozen Texas, right? We have all kinds of things going on that will require investment and skills in ways we don't see right now.
Thank you. Michael, I want to come to you with a question, and it really sort of gets at some of the things that on the surface look pretty good, like good developments in finance, the democratization of finance, commission-free trading. You alluded to it. There have been these high-profile stories where seemingly the little guys getting together in chat rooms have been able to gang up on big guys taking short positions, fundamentally change the pricing of a number of these so-called meme stocks. I don't even know if I know what that means exactly, but I guess I know what they are. But did the little guys, on balance, do you think, really make most of the money in all this action? Or did they sort of get shut out when their platform stopped working and maybe the big guys were still trading and making money on it? What do you think the net of all that was? And what do we need from regulators? Should we allow this kind of open season behavior and people without a lot of money, buying on margin? And is that a good idea? What do you think about all that?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think so.
Sorry about that.
Partly, I think what we're seeing is, we've got a lot of people who are using these tools appropriately, and then some who aren't. And so, in some ways, what we saw with
Mike got froze.
I've lost Michael. So
Me too.
In some ways, what we saw with Reddit, I think, is what he was going to say.
Right.
And I'm not sure exactly how to finish his thought, but
He just went to buy some GameStop stock again.
perhaps. I don't think it's the right time, though. I think a year from now it's going to be lower. It was a very interesting situation. My 2 cents on that, I think it was a really fascinating play, and I'm sure a lot of the trading community that gathered in Wall Street Bets did make a fair bit of money. I think probably some big money was also made by other hedge funds that piled in. And, I hope not too many people, average people bought at the top, but it's a dangerous game to play. There were probably a few good situations that they were able to take advantage of. I'm not sure those are going to be available much longer. And, investing is dangerous business. It's not a layup. And, I tend to think having some focus and stoicism so that your consumption requirements are modest is the best way to ensure financial success. I don't know about buying GameStop. Question.
See, this is what happened when I start to pick on the internet. The Reddit people, they took out my internet connection. So.
Well, you better clean up the bad answer the host tried to give. Is it good or bad that people have these tools, and what do regulators need to be worried about?
It's good. So they're tools, and tools can be misused. And so I think the regulatory issues here are the same as they've always been. Whenever you have shameless promotion for people's gain, right? So not everybody was stumping for GameStop really believed in GameStop. They were trying to do a short squeeze, or they were just pumping up the price. So this is being investigated, and I'm sure there will be the same rules that have always applied are going to apply here. The democratization of financial access, the lowering of costs of products and services is a good thing. But it also means that we have to have more people who have the access to these tools. They have the capability to use these tools. So, I think there is a policy role here for sure to enforce the rules that we have. I don't know that we necessarily need new rules. Frankly, whether the little guy's winning or the big guy's winning shouldn't matter. The point is that, people are taking advantage of the tools that they have available that are useful to them. But I think a lot of what we saw was drama and, people doing this for entertainment value as opposed to the financial value. So I don't want to get too drawn into the that exact story. But I think the story you told, Mike, of just, more people having access to tools at lower cost, that's a great thing. So now let's try to make sure we give people the ability to use those tools to the best of their ability.
We need more financial education from the Fetzer family chair in consumer.
That would help. Yeah, thanks to the Fetzers.
It would. Yes. It would. Question from the audience. E. Johnson wants us to talk a little bit about the changing economy. And I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on who are the winners in the work from home revolution that I think we're likely to see. I mean, do you agree that work from home is going to gain much more widespread acceptance? Give me a ballpark number on what percentage of hours we will see work from home above where we used to be. Is it 10%? Is it 30%? And who are the real beneficiaries of that? What are the good things about that? And who's going to lose because of that?
I want to call out one really good thing about work from home, which is that people with mobility issues who have long argued for accommodation are now demonstrating that they could have worked from home all along. And I think that there will just be for what the ADA, what the Americans with Disabilities Act means and what access to accommodation means will change as a result of the pandemic. And I think that is great news for disabled people in accommodation, especially on mobility. I think that the estimates are about 30% of the workforce is able to work from home, and that is a much more higher educated, much more white, much more male workforce that is able to work from home. And I suppose we've all heard the stories of the future of the office and whether the office is going away forever or not. I don't know how to guess that. I'll let somebody else guess at that.
Well, it's not going away forever, obviously, but it does give you some more flexibility. If we have good broadband connections, everyone can do this. You can work from home sometime, you can go to meetings. The big thing I think that we found is that you don't have to travel to Washington for a 2-hour meeting or a 4-hour meeting. You can do it on Zoom, which is how actually our National Academy of Sciences Committee, our last 5 meetings were on Zoom. They were very efficient. No one had to pack up and travel. So you have some of that advantage. But I do believe that for me, for instance, teaching online is much, much less efficient and less thorough and less useful than teaching live. Points don't get across. You don't have much discussion. You can't see all those faces to see who's understanding what you're saying, what you're not. No one's there laughing at your jokes. At least you don't pick it up very well. And so as far as I'm concerned, yeah, if you're in a crisis, if you've got a big problem, if you're trying to finish college, if you need a couple of courses, do something online. Okay, but it's not the same experience as being in a classroom with undergrads and graduate students who can talk to one another, who can get the flow of the class, who you can talk to after class for a minute or two and so forth. So but it's going to be here to stay for a while. And if it is, then we're not traveling so much. We're not going to as many hotels or having as many travel to conferences and things like that. Maybe we'll do more leisure travel. I don't know. Certainly we won't be chained to the house the way we are now, which sort of is forcing us to get used to it. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we don't know what lies ahead. I think everyone's eager to go back to normal, but the reality is normal probably won't be normal. And so, there's more and more talk about this really being an endemic and that we're going to have to deal with this virus and versions of health insecurity going forward. And, maybe it's not going to end travel or end meetings, but it's going to make us a little more careful about when we decide that we really need to travel or really need to have an in-person meeting. So I think all these things will bubble through. And from the stuff I focus on, particularly around household finance and how that affects people, this has effect there too. A lot of this is a face-to-face world. We make decisions sitting down with somebody who helps us how to figure out these things. And now people are getting mortgages, refinancing, they do all kinds of things all electronically. And so who has that ability? Who can do that and who can't? So I think those are going to be issues too that we're going to see as more and more things are digitized. Those people who maybe were better off with some hand-holding now are kind of left behind.
I do think the increase in digitization and remote work, though, has really big cumulative benefits for the environment that we should keep those in mind. I think that's really important. So, time will tell how that plays out, but certainly financial services firms and other kind of office-based businesses, consultancies, et cetera, I think a lot of them, already didn't have as much tethering to a physical office. And I think we might see that unwind in the days ahead. And I think you're right, Tim, business travel, it's hard to imagine it going back to what it used to be. But I agree, there's no substitute for face-to-face and in-person for certain things at certain times. And, we certainly find in the work we do at the foundation, you can sustain relationships with Zoom. It's a lot harder to build a good relationship on Zoom. And, maybe virtual reality will help us someday be even better at that, but who knows? But it also is much more efficient for many people to do this. We've had more people tune into this than we'd ever get at in-person events. And I always say, it's cheaper for us to deliver this. It's less onerous on all of you. We didn't have to get on a plane and go to Palm Springs or wherever we might have taken you. I know that sounds terrible when it's
Palm Springs was on the table. What the heck?
I know. It could have been a pretty good temperature differential for us this year, but seriously, it's low cost for attendees. They might tune in and say, "Wow, I don't know if I really want to be at this event," and then they got to do something else. They can watch it later if they want. So I think some of these things are here to stay, and it's kind of exciting, and it'll be neat to see how we can blend them with the best of the old ways. And hopefully at the university, we're able to do that in education. Mm-hmm. That'd be wonderful. Well, I want to give you all a chance for some closing comments. We're up at the top of the hour, but why don't we just go around in order, and anything you care to add to the discussion from this evening, Laura?
Oh, I think so. I think there is this question of what kind of life at the university looks like after. I really want that, or hope that we all really focus on the challenge of inequality that we had coming into this crisis, and the way that it is just driven on every axis of inequality, especially racial inequality, running through who's getting the disease and who's dying from the disease and who's suffering from the economic change. And just really focusing also on coming back with real attention to closing that inequality.
Tim?
I think I have to agree with Laura. I do think that the child allowance would make a huge difference in the lives of families, and much less stress, give them more roads to open those accounts that Mike might be talking about, and that Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve Bank might be able to create a low-cost account where they can deposit their child allowances and so forth. And the one thing we didn't talk about that's really different now is getting the kids back to school. In my household, we have two professionals who do just this all day long, and a 10-year-old who tries to get everything done as fast as he can so that he can go get online with his buddies. And so we're teaching our kids as well as trying to teach our students. And life will be much better when the kids can go back to school. And I'd like every teacher in America to get their vaccination, and we could find safe and effective ways to bring kids back to school. That would make a huge difference, no matter whether I was going to work in my office or whether I was working from home.
I bet that 10-year-old has learned a lot, though, hanging around you two.
He's learned some words that
Don't repeat them.
Otherwise.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I think that, we've learned a lot in this this COVID recession and pandemic. And I think things weren't nearly as worse as we thought they were going to be at the beginning. I think I really thought, I feared for the worst, and it didn't turn out to be the worst. but it's also taking way longer than anybody expected. And I think in terms of household finances and how this is going to affect families going forward, this is going to be a long time, years, maybe decades, to dig out of this hole that a lot of people are in. And maybe we won't feel it, but we'll see it. And so I think, we need to really be thinking about that longer term. It's not just another stimulus. It's really thinking about the kinds of policies that we can put in place, like the child allowance, that can help, over the next decade, because a lot of people are going to be set way back for a long period of time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're probably among the most fortunate working at a great university, being around people who, have a lot of great things ahead of them. And, this pandemic recession will leave a really deep scar for a lot of people who didn't come into it with very good prospects. And, that's just really harmful to the fabric of the country. So hopefully this is a bit of a wake-up call and a way to catalyze great thinking from people like all of you and others around the country, and we can get some great things done and get back on a better footing. That would be fantastic. I want to thank you all for giving us your Tuesday night. It's been great to see all of you again. Hopefully we'll be back in person before long, and maybe someday we have the program in Palm Springs again. You never know. Could happen.
Man.
Could happen. It's not a promise.
Palm Springs. That's the deal.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. It's been great to be with you tonight.
Thank you.
Mike.
The UW Now will be back again next Tuesday, February 23rd, with an update from UW experts on the latest developments in the fight against COVID-19, including healthcare delivery, treatments, vaccines, and the new variants. We'll share the latest facts with plenty of depth on these important topics. Thank you again for joining us, and on Wisconsin.